Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're doing something a little different. We are going to try to rewrite a mental map that I think a lot of us have stuck in our heads. You know, the map of the late 19th century?
The colonial map.
Exactly.
Yeah.
One that's all colored in,
Yeah.
pink for the British, blue for the French, green for the Germans. It's 1896.
Right.
The scramble for Africa is not just some historical phrase. It is an active, violent industrial process. You have these European powers sitting in conference rooms in Berlin, literally carving up an entire continent with a ruler and a pencil.
It is the absolute height of imperial hubris. The assumption, and I mean the absolute unquestioned assumption in the halls of power in London, Paris, and Rome, was that this was all just
Inevitable.
It was simply a matter of logistics. African resistance was viewed as, maybe noble perhaps, but ultimately futile against the Maxim gun and the organized discipline of a modern European army.
Right. It's that whole spears versus machine guns narrative we've all heard.
Yeah.
But then you hit a glitch.
Yeah.
An anomaly. A moment where the narrative doesn't just bend, it snaps.
It completely shatters.
We're talking about the Battle of Adwa.
A battle that genuinely shocked the world.
Yeah.
And I really don't use that phrase lightly. This was an earthquake.
We were talking about an African army not just resisting, but absolutely annihilating a modern European colonial force. And when I say annihilating, I want to be really clear about the scale here.
It's staggering.
The stats we have in our stack today are just mind-blowing. Italy lost more soldiers in one single day at Adwa, that's March 1st, 1896, than they did in all the wars of Italian unification put together.
Okay, can we just pause on that for a second?
Please.
The Risorgimento, the decades of wars that created the nation of Italy itself, the wars of Garibaldi, all of that was less bloody for the Italians than this one afternoon in the Ethiopian highlands.
It just puts the scale of this disaster for Italy and this triumph for Ethiopia into a completely different perspective.
A whole new universe.
So our mission today is to unpack this. But we are not just going to do the rah-rah Ethiopia 1 headline. We want to understand how. Because looking at the sources we have, and it is a heavy stack, this wasn't a miracle.
No, it wasn't magic, it was strategy.
We've got the Battle of Adwa, reflections on Ethiopia's historic victory edited by Paulus Milkias and Getachew Metaferia, which is just incredibly detailed on the military side.
A phenomenal resource.
Then we have a fascinating thesis by Joseph A. Stewart called The Battle for the Battle of Adwa, which looks at how the memory of this battle has been, used and weaponized politically over the last century.
Which is a whole other story in itself.
And we've also got articles from Tides Magazine and Zihabesha for that on-the-ground cultural context, the human stories.
And what all those sources tell us is that this victory was built on a few key pillars. Spy games, incredible logistics, a massive diplomatic scam that backfired spectacularly, and a geography that the Italians just completely misunderstood.
And a legacy that is still messy today. I mean, really messy, especially when it comes to Eritrea.
Absolutely. The echoes of 1896 are still being heard in the Horn of Africa right now as we speak.
So let's start at the beginning, the setup. To understand the explosion, we have to understand the pressure cooker. We have Italy on one side. What is their headspace in the 1890s? Because they are the aggressors here.
Well, you have to remember, Italy is a brand new nation. They only unified in 1861. So compared to Britain or France or even, Portugal, they are very, very late to the colonial party.
They're the new kid on the block, and they feel like they have something to prove.
Precisely. They are suffering from a severe case of status anxiety. They wanted what they called a place in the sun. They needed that colonial prestige to be taken seriously as a major European power.
So it's about ego.
It's a lot about ego, but it wasn't just that. They had serious economic issues at home. You had massive poverty, especially in the South, and a huge excess population. People were leaving Italy in droves for America, for Argentina. The government desperately needed a place to dump their excess population and find new investment opportunities.
A release valve.
A colonial release valve. And the man leading this charge is the Prime Minister, Francesco Crispi. Reading the descriptions of him in Milkias' book, he sounds intense.
Intense is a very polite way to put it.
Many historians just straight up describe him as a megalomaniac. He was obsessed with the glory of Rome. He wanted to build a second Roman Empire. He actually believed colonization was, and this is a quote, a gleam of the chivalrous spirit. He
Wow.
was completely detached from the reality of what it was. He was obsessed with Italian glory to the point of absolute delusion.
And his view of Ethiopia, I mean, what did he see when he looked at them on a map?
Total, unvarnished racism. He looked at Ethiopia, or Abyssinia, as it was often known then, and he didn't see an ancient Christian empire with a complex feudal structure and a history going back to Solomon and Sheba.
He didn't see any of that.
No. He saw a barbaric land. He saw a collection of warring tribes.
And that's the fatal error, right? The core misunderstanding, the assumption that it's just a bunch of tribes.
That's the one. The entire Italian strategy was built on that false premise. They counted on a divide and conquer strategy. They knew Ethiopia was, in a sense, feudal. They knew there were regional princes or races who were incredibly powerful and often had rivalries with the emperor.
So the plan was simple.
The plan was, we'll just bribe these guys. We'll offer Ras Mengesha this. We'll offer Ras Alula that. We'll get the raises to turn on the emperor, and the whole house of cards will just fall.
Which brings us to the man they completely underestimated, Emperor Menelik II.
Menelik is one of the most fascinating figures in 19th century history, full stop. He wasn't just some warrior king. He was a pragmatist, a modernizer, a master strategist.
And he'd been busy.
He had spent years consolidating his power, bringing the southern regions of what is now modern Ethiopia into the empire. And ironically, and this is my favorite detail in this whole story, he had spent years buying modern weapons from Europe.
Including from Italy.
Including from Italy.
That is the part that just always gets me. The Italians literally sold him the modern rifles and cannons he would eventually use to shoot them.
It's just a classic case of short-term profit completely blinding you to long-term strategy. But the real spark, the thing that moves this from a low-level colonial tension to an all-out war, is a piece of paper. The Treaty of Wuchale, signed in 1889.
Okay, so let's unpack this treaty, because this really is the smoking gun. It feels like a plot point from a legal thriller.
It really does. So Menelik signs this treaty with Italy. On the surface, it seems like a pretty standard treaty of friendship and trade. Menelik gets a big loan, which he needs, and he gets diplomatic recognition. But there is a trick, a deliberate deception, many argue. The treaty is signed in two languages, Amharic and Italian.
And I'm guessing they didn't quite say the same thing.
Not on the most important point, specifically Article 17. This is the infamous clause. In the Amharic version, the one Menelik and his court read and signed, it said that Ethiopia could use Italy's help for its foreign relations, if they wanted to.
So it's optional.
It's an offer of assistance. We are friends. Call us if you ever need a favor. Sovereignty is totally intact.
But the Italian version?
The Italian version used very specific phrasing. It used a verb that implied obligation. It said Ethiopia must consent to use Italy for all foreign relations.
Which legally turns Ethiopia into a protectorate.
A total protectorate. It means Ethiopia has no voice on the world stage except through Rome. They lose their independence with the stroke of a pen, and they don't even know it.
And Menelik doesn't realize this immediately, right? How does he find out?
Not immediately. But he finds out in the most humiliating way possible. He tries to engage in standard 19th century diplomacy. He writes official letters to Queen Victoria of England and to Kaiser Wilhelm of Germany. Basically, greetings from the kings of Ethiopia. Let's establish ties. Let's trade.
And they ghost him.
Worse. They reply, but their replies effectively say, why are you writing to us? We can't talk to you directly. You are an Italian protectorate. Go talk to Rome.
Ouch. That must have been an absolute cold shower. To think you are an equal on the world stage and then find out the other powers see you as a vassal?
It was a massive, shocking wake-up call. Menelik realized he had been scammed, but his reaction is what sets him apart. He doesn't just throw a tantrum or declare war on the spot. He gets financial.
He pays them back.
He does. He scraps together the funds. And remember, this was a lot of money for Ethiopia at the time. And he pays back the loan Italy gave him as part of the treaty. But he doesn't just pay it back. He pays it back with 3 times the interest.
3 times? Why so much?
It was a statement. He wanted to be absolutely crystal clear. I owe you nothing. We are square. He clears the debt to show he is financially independent. He keeps the weapons he'd already bought with the loan money.
Of course.
And he formally abrogates the treaty. He sends a letter to all the European powers saying essentially, the Treaty of Wuchale is null and void. Nice try, but the deal is off.
And the Italians, specifically this diplomat, Count Antonelli, they do not take this well.
No. Antonelli is furious. He goes to the palace in Addis Ababa. He threatens war. He thinks he can bully the Ethiopian court because, again, in his mind, he is the civilized European dealing with savages.
And this is where we get one of the most iconic moments and iconic figures from the sources. Empress Taitu steps in.
We have to talk about Taitu. She is not just some passive emperor's wife in the background.
Not at all.
Taitu Betul is a powerhouse. She's from a noble family in the north, she's fiercely intelligent, and she is a hardliner. She saw the Italian game from a mile away. So when Antonelli is there threatening to bring the might of the Italian army down on them, implying that Ethiopia will be crushed like glass, she just laughs in his face.
I have the quote right here. It's just incredible. She says, "Go ahead with your threat. We will slaughter those who come to invade us."
She basically tells him, your war is with me too. She creates a situation where Menelik cannot back down even if he wanted to. She stiffens the spine of the entire court. There's another famous story where she told some of the more hesitant male nobles to drop the skirt and put on trousers.
Wow, so she's really the one pushing for confrontation.
She's the one saying there is no compromise with someone who tries to steal your house. But talking tough is one thing, backing it up is another. Because, as you said earlier, the Italians were banking on divide and conquer. They had been working the phones, trying to get those regional kings to betray Menelik.
Right, they thought Tetu's hard line would just isolate Menelik.
Exactly. And this leads us to what I'd call Section 2, the chess match, unity versus division. The Italians were supremely confident. They had been sending money, weapons, and promises to Ras Mengesha of Tigray and Rasalula. These were powerful men in the north who had long-standing rivalries with Menelik, who was from Shewa in the center.
To the classic Game of Thrones logic, you expect them to see an opportunity and stab the king in the back.
That's the European feudal logic they were applying. But they fundamentally misunderstood the Ethiopian psyche. When the existential threat appeared, the Ferengi, the white foreigners coming to take the land and, crucially, to change the Orthodox Christian religion, the internal squabbles just stopped.
And there is that incredible story about Ras Mengesha that illustrates this perfectly.
It's one of the most powerful moments in the lead-up to the war. Ras Mengesha of Tigray, the very man Italy thought would be their key ally, their puppet. He travels to Menelik's court, and in front of all the other nobles, he performs a public, ancient ritual of submission. He carries a heavy stone on his shoulder and lays it at the emperor's feet.
That is such a powerful image. It's not just a political alliance, it's a deep cultural statement.
It's profound. He's saying, I have sinned against you, we have been rivals, but I am yours to command against the outsider. It sent a shockwave through the country and a shockwave through the Italian command. Instead of a fractured tribal mess, Italy was now facing a unified wall.
So Menelik seizes this momentum. He issues a war decree, and the wording of this decree is key. It isn't just a military order to report for duty.
No, it's deeply emotional and religious. He appeals to everything. He says, an enemy has come who would ruin our country and change our religion. Help me with your strength. He's not just calling on soldiers. He's calling on fathers, husbands, Christians. He's appealing to faith, to family, to the land itself.
And the response.
Overwhelming. We're talking about a mobilization on a scale that the Italians just could not comprehend.
Something like 100,000 troops?
At least 100,000. And this isn't a standing army sitting in barracks. This is a citizen army. Farmers literally drop their plows. Peasants grab their rifles. You have Oromo cavalry from the south, famous for their skill on horseback. You have Amhara infantry from the Central Highlands. You have Tigrayan riflemen from the north who knew the terrain best. It was an incredibly diverse force, totally united by this single cause.
And we absolutely need to circle back to the women. Because the sources, especially the articles from Thaddeus magazine, make it very clear this wasn't just a bunch of men marching off to war.
Not even close. The role of women was the secret weapon of the Ethiopian army. It was their logistical superpower. We already mentioned Empress Tetu commanding her own personal army of 5,000 soldiers, which is a brigade, by the way. But the real game changer was what you might call the camp followers.
Right. This wasn't a separate supply corps.
No. In a European army of that time, you have a massive, slow-moving supply train, wagons pulled by mules, crates of hardtack and canned food, complicated lines of communication back to a depot. If the wagons get stuck in the mud, the army starves.
A huge vulnerability.
The Ethiopian army didn't have that. It had tens of thousands of women, wives, sisters, mothers, who marched with the troops.
And they were the supply chain.
They were the supply chain. They were the quartermasters, the cooks, the nurses. They managed the food. They would bake injera on the march. They carried dried meat and grains. They managed the water, which was critical. They cared for the wounded. This allowed the Ethiopian army to move incredibly fast and with incredible flexibility across these punishing mountains.
They weren't tethered to a supply depot hundreds of miles away.
Exactly. They were a self-sufficient, mobile city. The Italians, with their European logistics, simply couldn't keep up with them or even really comprehend how they operated.
Which brings us to the prelude battles. Because before we even get to the big one at Adwa, there were some serious clashes that should have been a wake-up call for the Italians.
Huge red flags that they just ignored. First, you have the Battle of Amba Alige in December 1895. An Italian fort commanded by a Major Toselli was completely overrun, annihilated.
So they already had a taste of what they were up against.
You'd think so, but they chalked it up to being outnumbered. Then comes the Siege of Mekelle in January 1896.
Right, the Siege of Mekelle. This is where Empress Taintu really shows her tactical genius.
It is a masterclass in asymmetrical warfare. The Italians were holed up in a well-fortified fort at Mekelle. They had cannons, machine guns. A frontal assault would have been a bloodbath for the Ethiopians and a waste of manpower.
And Menelik might have been tempted to do just that.
Some of his generals were. They wanted to just charge and get it over with. But Taitu, the sources say, literally scouted the position herself. She didn't just look at the fort, she looked at the geography around it.
She looked for the weakness.
And she found it. The fort's only water source was a stream located outside the walls. It was their lifeline. And she told Menelik, "Why are we throwing our men against stone walls? Let's just take the water."
Simple, brutal, effective.
She ordered her troops to seize the stream and cut off the water supply to the fort. The siege wasn't about bullets. It was about thirst. Within days, the Italian garrison was forced to surrender.
But here is the twist.
Yeah.
Menelik, having them dead to rights, lets them leave.
This is such a crucial moment. The Italians are at his mercy. He could have imprisoned them, killed them. Instead, he allows them to march out with their weapons and their flags. He even provides them with fresh mules to carry their gear because their own pack animals had died of thirst.
Why on earth would he do that? It seems strategically naive.
It goes back to his grand strategy. He was still playing a diplomatic game. He wanted to show Europe that he was a civilized Christian monarch, not the barbarian that Crispy was painting him as. He thought, if I show magnanimity, if I show mercy, maybe Europe will respect me. Maybe the Italians will negotiate and go home.
And how did the Italians and General Baratieri interpret that generosity?
They saw it as weakness.
Of course they did.
They completely misread it. They convinced themselves that Menelik must be scared of a real pitched battle, that he let them go because he knew he couldn't win a major fight. It just emboldened them. It made them more arrogant. They decided to press on deeper into the country, towards Adwa.
So Menelik's act of mercy, his attempt at diplomacy, actually sets the stage for the final bloody showdown.
It does. And that takes us right into Section 3, the spy games and the march. Because now we are in late February 1896. The two massive armies are maneuvering, they're close to each other in the mountains of Tigray, and the intelligence war is heating up.
On the Italian side, we have General Oreste Baratieri. He's the commander on the ground. And reading the accounts in our sources, he seems paralyzed.
He is incredibly nervous,
Right.
and with good reason. He's an experienced soldier, and he knows the reality on the ground is not what Rome thinks it is. He sees the terrain, these jagged volcanic mountains, these trackless plateaus. He knows Menelik's numbers are huge, maybe 100,000 strong against his 17,000 or so.
A huge disparity.
He calls the situation a military phthisis, a wasting disease, a consumption, where his army will just waste away from logistical problems without even fighting.
So his instinct is to retreat, or at least wait.
His sound military judgment tells him to wait. He knows Menelik has a huge army to feed. It's a logistical nightmare for the Ethiopians, too. If he just sits tight in his well-supplied fortifications, the Ethiopian army might starve and begin to disperse. It's a sound, cautious strategy.
But Rome isn't having it. Prime Minister Crispy is a long way from the front lines.
Crispy is sitting in Rome, feeling the political heat. His government is shaky. He needs a glorious colonial victory to shore up his power. He starts sending these furious telegrams to Baratieri, just mocking him. He basically calls him a coward. He says, this is a military phthisis, not a war. He demands a victory to save the monarchy's face.
He's goading him.
He is absolutely goading him into a fight he does not want. He backs Baratieri into a political corner where inaction feels like treason.
So Baratieri is being pushed into a fight against his better judgment. Meanwhile, on the other side, The Ethiopians are playing 4D chess with the intel.
Oh, they are running a massive counterintelligence operation. It's brilliant. Menelik and his generals, especially the legendary Raza, who was a master of this stuff, they use double agents. They let local people get captured by the Italians, and these people fed Baratieri a steady diet of completely false information.
What were they telling him?
They were telling him exactly what he wanted to hear. They were feeding his confirmation bias. They said, the Ethiopian army is starving, they're eating their pack animals, the soldiers are demoralized and deserting. They are all about to disband because of a major religious holiday. The regional kings are on the verge of defecting and turning on Menelik.
Every single piece of intel was designed to make him think the Ethiopian army was a house of cards, ready to collapse.
Precisely. And the sources highlight one specific spy, a local peasant named Awolom. He was working for the Italians as a guide, but secretly he was reporting everything to Rasalula. He was the one who confirmed the biggest lie of all, that Menelik's army was in retreat.
So Baratieri thinks he's not attacking a prepared army. He thinks he's chasing a disintegrating mob.
He thinks he can deliver a swift kick to a retreating, starving army and claim a glorious, easy victory. So, on February 29th, it's a leap year, he holds a council of war. Pressured by Rome, emboldened by this bad intel, he makes the fateful decision.
He decides to launch a surprise attack.
He plans a highly complex night march. 3 columns of troops, moving in parallel through the mountains to seize the high ground 3 specific hills before dawn on March 1st. He thinks he can catch the Ethiopians sleeping in their camp and destroy them.
But the maps. We have to talk about the maps. The sources call this the cartographic disaster.
This is where the whole plan just falls apart before a shot is even fired. You have to try and visualize this. It's pitch black. The terrain is incredibly rugged. We're talking deep ravines, steep cliffs, thorny scrub, no real roads. And the Italians are navigating using hand-sketched maps that were woefully, dangerously inaccurate.
Sketchy maps in pitch black mountainous terrain. That sounds like a recipe for absolute chaos.
It was. The entire plan depended on these 3 columns staying in visual or auditory contact. But the map showed a key landmark, a hill called Kidane Merit. The problem is, in that region of Ethiopia, Kidane Merit is a very common name for a church or a hill, meaning covenant of mercy. There were 2 hills with similar names, miles and miles apart.
Oh no, you can see it coming.
General Albertone, leading one of the columns, the native brigade, the Askaris, he looks at his map, he sees the name, and he marches his column to the hill he thinks is the objective. But it's the wrong hill. It's the one much further away. He marches miles ahead of where he is supposed to be. He completely breaks the Italian line.
He basically marches his own column into total isolation.
He walks right into the lion's mouth. And meanwhile, the Ethiopians, remember, the Italian intelligence said they would be starving, demoralized, maybe even retreating.
Right. And sleeping.
They were wide awake. It happened to be St. George's Day on the Ethiopian calendar. St. George is the patron saint of the army, so Menelik, Empress Tetu, and all the races were attending an early morning church service, praying for victory.
So they are already up, dressed, and armed,
Yeah.
and in a state of high spiritual readiness.
They are completely ready. Scouts on the ridges see the Italian columns advancing in the pre-dawn light. They rush into the church service. The Italians are advancing. The service ends abruptly. Menelik mounts his horse. The battle begins.
And this brings us to section 4. The battle itself. It's dawn, March 1st. General Albertone is out there alone, miles ahead of the rest of the army. What happens?
The Ethiopian commanders can't believe their luck. They see this isolated column and they pounce. They use a traditional tactic called afina. It translates roughly to encirclement or nipping. They don't meet him head-on in a neat European line. They swarm him from the front and from both flanks.
So it's not a battle line, it's a tidal wave.
It's a human tidal wave. Albertone's brigade of about 4,000 men is suddenly hit by 20,000, then 30,000 Ethiopian troops under the command of Menelik's best generals. They fight bravely. The Askaris were known to be tough soldiers, but they are just crushed by the sheer weight of numbers and firepower. Albertone himself is captured. His entire brigade just ceases to exist.
And the other Italian generals, De Bormida, Aramondi, they must hear the shooting.
They hear it, but this is the tragedy of Baratieri's flawed plan. They are too far apart to support each other effectively. General de Bormida, leading another column, hears the intense fighting and tries to move to help Albertone. But because the maps are wrong and the terrain is so broken, these deep ravines are cutting them off, he gets led astray by his guides. He ends up in a completely different valley, known as the Valley of Mariam Shavitu,
He gets lost and cut off.
completely cut off. And now, with Albertone's column destroyed, the full weight of the Ethiopian army, including the fearsome Oromo cavalry, shifts and slams into him. Dabormida tries to form a hollow square.
Can you explain that formation for us?
The hollow square is a classic 19th century European formation. Soldiers form a rigid, multi-rank square facing outwards with rifles and fixed bayonets. It's designed to repel cavalry charges on open fields, like in the Napoleonic Wars. It's a fortress made of men.
But Adwa isn't an open field.
Adwa is the opposite of an open field. It's broken ground, rocks, trees, steep slopes. You can't maintain a tight, disciplined square in a ravine. The Ethiopians didn't charge into the bayonets. They used the terrain for cover, picking off the Italians from behind rocks.
So the formation breaks down.
The formation breaks down into chaos. And then the Oromo cavalry rides in. The sources describe the combat here as absolutely terrifying. The Ethiopians used a running fire technique, moving, shooting, taking cover, which was very modern, actually. But when they got close, they dropped their rifles and used their traditional weapons. Swords, and especially the shotel, that famous curved blade designed to hook around an enemy's shield and spears.
That must have been a psychological nightmare for the Italian conscripts.
Absolutely. Imagine you're a 20-year-old conscript from Sicily or Naples. You've been told you're fighting barbarians who will run away at the sound of a modern cannon. Suddenly, you are in a ravine, your officer is dead, your formation has collapsed, and you are being swarmed by warriors who are absolutely fearless in hand-to-hand combat. Total panic set in.
And the center column, the main force where General Girattieri is.
The center, under General Aramondi, tries to establish a defensive line, but it's too late. The Ethiopian artillery, and let's not forget, Menelik had modern Hotchkiss machine guns and mountain cannons too, pounded their positions. And Empress Taytu was there, in the thick of it with her own personal army, shouting at any soldiers who started to retreat, shaming them and urging them back into the fight.
She was actually on the battlefield, directing troops.
She was right there, a commander. By noon, the entire Italian army has disintegrated. It's no longer an army, it's a panicked mob running for their lives. Bertieri, the commander who is so afraid of this battle, sees the writing on the wall. He orders a retreat, but it's too late. It turns into a rout. He effectively flees, abandoning his troops to save himself.
Wow, from commander to fugitive in a few hours.
It is a total, complete, and utter wipeout. The casualty figures are just horrifying for the Italians. Out of a force of about 17,000, they suffer something like 70% casualties. Nearly 3,000 dead Italians, thousands more wounded and captured, another 2,000 dead Askaris, a modern European army just erased from the map in the space of about 6 hours.
It's hard to comprehend the shock that must have sent through the world. The telegraph wires must have been melting.
It was unbelievable. The newspapers in New York, London, Paris, they couldn't process it. The first reports were dismissed as impossible rumors. A European army hadn't been defeated like this by a non-European force in living memory.
But the battle ends, the smoke clears, and we get into the aftermath. And this is where the story gets a little darker, a little more complicated. We have to talk about Section 5.
Yes, the fate of the vanquished. Now, the Italian prisoners, the white soldiers, were actually treated relatively well, all things considered. Menelik, ever the strategist, wanted to use them as bargaining chips in the peace negotiations. He knew they were more valuable alive than dead.
Right, he's still playing that diplomatic game. Look how civilized and merciful I am.
Exactly. But the Askaris, these were the Eritrean and Tigrayan colonial troops who had been fighting for Italy.
And the Ethiopians didn't see them as enemy soldiers in the same way.
No. They saw them as traitors, as family members who had sided with the invader against their own people. Menelik viewed them as Ethiopians who had sold their souls to the Ferengi. They were judged not by a military tribunal, but by the church.
And the punishment.
The punishment was medieval. It was brutal. The judgment was amputation of the right hand and the left foot.
God, that is just horrific.
It is, and the sources are very clear on this. We shouldn't shy away from it. It shows the sheer brutality of internal conflict. It wasn't just a clean war against foreigners. It had elements of a civil war. It's a very dark stain on the victory, and it's a memory that is still very raw in Eritrea today.
And speaking of Eritrea, this leads us to what is maybe the biggest, most controversial question of the entire deep dive. The why didn't he chase them question.
The great what if of Ethiopian history.
Exactly. Menelik wins. The Italian army in the field is destroyed. The road to the coast, to the Italian colony of Eritrea, is wide open. He could have marched his victorious army to the Red Sea and driven the Italians out of Africa completely, liberated Eritrea right then and there. But he stops.
He stops at the Mareb River, which was the traditional border. This is the most debated decision in Ethiopian history. Why stop? Why leave Eritrea in Italian hands?
What did the sources say? I mean, surely he knew the Italians would regroup and come back someday.
There are three main theories, and they all have some weight to them. First, there's the logistics argument. Carlos Milkias points this out very strongly. Menelik's massive army was starving.
Right, the living off the land system.
The Gabira-Madaria system had completely exhausted the region of Tigray, which was already suffering from years of famine and locusts. There was no food left. To march into the arid lowlands of Eritrea would have been suicidal. The army would have died of hunger and thirst.
An army marches on its stomach. If there's no food, there's no war. It's as simple as that.
It's a very compelling practical argument. The second one is the political argument. Menelik feared that if he pushed too far, if he humiliated Italy too much, like wiping them off the continent entirely, he would unite all of Europe against him.
Right. Suddenly Britain and France might look at that and say, okay, this powerful, independent African king is getting a little too big for his boots. We need to team up with Italy and crush him.
Precisely. He didn't want a forever war against a European coalition. He wanted a recognized border. He wanted peace and sovereignty for his empire. He was being a pragmatist, not a crusader.
But then there's the third theory, the betrayal theory.
This is the one that really hurts, and it's the dominant narrative in a lot of Eritrean historiography. Some sources, and certainly many modern critics, argue that Menelik deliberately sacrificed the Mareg Melish, the land beyond the Mareb River, which is Eritrea, to save his core Shiman-dominated empire.
So he used Eritrea as a bargaining chip.
In this view, yes. He basically told the Italians, okay, you can keep the coast, just recognize me as the undisputed emperor of everything else, and we'll call it a day.
So the seeds of the 20th century conflicts, the brutal Ethiopia-Eritrea wars, the 30-year struggle for independence, they are sown right here, in the very moment of victory over a common enemy.
It's an incredibly complicated and tragic legacy. Menelik saved Ethiopia, but in doing so, he allowed the colonial division of the North to stand. That division hardened over the next 50 years into a separate colonial identity for Eritrea, which eventually, inevitably, led to the demand for independence.
But in Europe, in 1896, the immediate fallout is just chaos.
Oh, it's political pandemonium in Rome. Crispy's government collapses instantly. The moment the news arrives, he resigns in total disgrace. There are riots in Rome, in Naples, in Milan.
But, and this is the part I find fascinating, they aren't rioting for revenge, are they?
No. This is what's so incredible. They are shouting, Viva Menelik, in the streets of Rome.
No way. The Italian public is cheering for the guy who just crushed their army.
Yes. Because the Italian public, especially the socialists and the working class, was sick and tired of these expensive, bloody colonial adventures. They saw the war as a waste of money. And, more importantly, a waste of the lives of their sons. They respected the strength Menelik showed. They felt he had justly defended his home.
That is absolutely incredible. Public opinion turning against their own government in favor of the enemy.
And the Italian government has no choice. A few months later, they signed the Treaty of Addis Ababa. In it, Italy revokes the Treaty of Wuchale and recognizes the absolute, unconditional independence of Ethiopia. Menelik gets everything he wanted from the start.
So let's zoom out. Section 6, the legacy. Because Adwa stops being just a battle in a remote part of Africa and becomes a global symbol.
It becomes the symbol. Adwa broke the spell of late 19th century white supremacy. Until that moment, the narrative, backed by pseudoscience and military victories, was that the white man was destined to rule the black man. Adwa proved that was a lie. It proved that a black nation, through unity, strategy, and courage, could decisively defeat a white colonial power on the battlefield.
And it reverberated across the ocean, right?
Yeah.
To the diaspora in the Americas and the Caribbean.
It had a huge, electrifying impact. It became the foundational event for the modern Pan-African movement. People like W.E.B. Du Bois, Marcus Garvey, they looked to Ethiopia as the beacon of black dignity, the proof of black potential. Ethiopianism became a global political and religious movement.
You could even see it in the flags.
Yes, that's the most visible legacy. Look at the flags of African nations when they finally won their independence in the 1950s and 60s. Ghana, Senegal, Mali, Guinea.
Hmm.
So many of them adopted the green, yellow, and red tricolor.
Those are the colors of the Ethiopian flag.
They were paying direct homage to Adwa. They were saying, we are all the children of Menelik. We are all inspired by this victory. It was the symbol that independence wasn't a gift to be given by colonizers, but a right to be taken by force if necessary.
But there is also the internal legacy. The battle for Adwa, as Joseph Stewart's thesis puts it. The battle over its memory.
This is really the intellectual meat of the deep dive for me. Stewart argues, very convincingly, that every Ethiopian regime since Menelik has used the memory of Adwa to legitimize itself, but they've all told a different story.
How so? Give us an example.
Well, Emperor Haile Selassie used it constantly to bolster the monarchy. He presented himself as the direct heir to Menelik's imperial wisdom and strength. Adwa was a story of a great king saving his people.
Okay, that makes sense.
Then you have the Derg, the brutal communist junta that overthrew Selassie in 1974. They used Adwa too. But for them, it wasn't a story about an emperor. They spun it as a people's war, a victory of the oppressed peasant masses rising up against foreign imperialism. Menelik was just a figurehead.
Same battle, completely different political spin.
Exactly. And then the EPRDF, the coalition that took power in the 90s, they had a much more ambivalent view. They celebrated the victory against foreigners, but they also used it to critique what they called the internal Amhara dominance of Menelik's empire and to highlight the betrayal and loss of Eritrea. It just shows that historical memory is never static. It's a tool. It changes shape depending on who is holding it.
It really is. Adwa is like a mirror. You see what you want to see in it. The glorious national unity, the seed of a future civil war, the people's triumph.
But the reality of what happened on that day, the unity, the strategy, the sacrifice, that remains untouchable.
So let's try to wrap this up. What does this all mean? When we look at that old colonial map of Africa and we see that one country that wasn't colored in, that one space that remained independent.
Adwa wasn't a miracle. I want to stress that again. It was the result of brilliant strategy, incredible national unity, and yes, a healthy dose of Italian arrogance and incompetence. But the what if is just haunting.
If Menelik had lost.
If Menelik had lost at Adwa, Ethiopia would have been colonized, just like everywhere else. The history of African independence movements in the 20th century would look radically different. There would be no powerful, ancient symbol of uncolonized black power to look up to. The psychological landscape of the entire century would be different.
It truly is one of those pivotal moments in human history.
It is. The victory preserved the Ethiopian body, the land, the sovereignty. But the psychological victory, the proof that dignity could be defended by force, that the colonial project was not inevitable, that victory was global, that belongs to everyone.
And yet we are left with that tragedy we discussed. The victory that unified the nation against the outsider, but left an internal scar. The question of Eritrea, that would fester and bleed for another century.
That is the tragedy within the triumph. Adwa solved one existential threat in 1896, but in the way it ended, it perhaps created another that took 100 years to fully explode. History is rarely clean.
A fascinating, complicated, and absolutely essential deep dive today. Thank you so much for guiding us through it.
My pleasure. It's a story that everyone should know.
And to you listening, think about that the next time you hear about the scramble for Africa. Remember the one time the scramble got scrambled. Thanks for listening. We will see you on the next deep dive.